China's foreign ministry says allegations that it infiltrated an agent into a Tory parliamentary pressure group were malicious slander. The man at the centre of the allegations said he was completely innocent. MPs queuing up to speak on the issue in the Commons were warned by the Speaker not to stray into specifics.
Commenting on the identities of those alleged to be involved, engaging in speculation about the case or discussing other details runs a serious risk of prejudicing any future prosecutions, which the comments made in the media were unhelpful.
The Met's confirmed it's investigating espionage-related offences and that one of the two people arrested worked in Parliament for Tory MPs, trying to harden the government's line on China.
The whole House is rightly appalled about reports of espionage in this building. The sanctity of this place must be protected, and the right of members to speak their minds without fear or sanction must be maintained. We will defend our democracy and our security. So I was emphatic with Premier Lee that actions which seek to undermine British democracy are completely unacceptable and will never be tolerated.
Some Tories insisted that exchange with the Chinese Premier at the weekend summit in Delhi didn't go far enough, and the government should formally categorise China as a threat.
What we need to do is to recognise that China is the largest threat, both to the world and to the United Kingdom, for freedom and democracy. And does he not agree that the government should designate it as such?
The problem lies in the mess we've got into over what we define China as with respect to us. Are they a threat or are they not? If they are a threat, why do we not call them a threat and take the relative action that is necessary to deal with them on that basis and sanction some people?
Last July, the heads of MI5 and America's FBI made an unprecedented joint public appearance to raise the alarm bells on China's global espionage efforts.
The Chinese intelligence services, or bodies within the CCP itself, such as its United Front Work Department, are mounting patient, well-funded, deceptive campaigns to buy and exert influence.
Their message was that China's secret services seek not just conventional intelligence in rival countries, but influence. Symposium is a think tank specialising in China's world impact.
I think if the allegations are confirmed, and if that's really what happened, I think it would be a great success by the relevant agencies of the Communist Party of China. That they would get right into the center of the policy debates, of the decision making on China in the United Kingdom. So it would be I think it would be a remarkable success.
One person from a different pressure group on China observed the arrested researcher at work in Westminster and believes whatever his motive, he was highly effective.
Within Parliament, there were sort of two major groups working on China. The one that I'm involved with, called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which had been seen as taking a stronger line, and the China Research Group. I know that on a number of occasions, this individual had briefed very strongly against the work that we were doing, against the harder line. And he'd done that for a few parliamentary initiatives, and it's probably not wise to go into them in too much detail at this stage while an investigation is underway. All I would say is that he was effective. I know that his briefings of MPs, of journalists, of people who are around the policy community were effective. They turned people away from what they might have seen as the stronger line on China.
Lawyers for the man identified by the Times newspaper this morning, but not charged, issued a statement from him, saying he'd spent his career trying to educate others about the challenge and threats presented by the Chinese Communist Party. He went on to do what's been claimed against me in extravagant news reporting would be against everything I stand for.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP and former party leader Duncan Smith, who is a long-time critic of China's activities in the UK and who has been sanctioned by the Beijing government. I began by asking him why he is so worried about this case.
Well, we've already had one case about a year and a half ago, and we were warned then that there were problems, but they would be tightening up of security. And now we find what possibly, we don't know, may be an espionage ring centred on Westminster, which seemed to be about damaging reputations.
A ring?
Well, that's what we're talking about here, because we're talking about more than one individual. So my point is that there are real issues here about the security, the strength of security, and also the fact that many of us here, a number of us, about 7, are sanctioned already by the Chinese government and face attacks, cyber attacks, etc., on a reasonably regular basis. So we are concerned about it.
But are you being overly dramatic here? We know about 2 individuals who are suspected of espionage. That doesn't make a ring, does it?
Well, the prosecutions aren't yet in front of us, and all I simply say is there are people here in Parliament, or were in Parliament, that the authorities believe were party to a process of espionage and disruption inside this Parliament, and I think whatever else about it, that is a pretty dangerous affair.
Are you saying that there could be more than 2?
I'm not going to comment further than that. I simply say that there have been individuals here that are now under investigation. I mean, who knows, there may be more.
Let's talk about the timing of this. This researcher was at first arrested in March, and we found out about this yesterday. Did you know about this earlier?
No, I only knew about it an hour before the article was published because I was told about it. I didn't know about it before. A number of people had suspicions about certain briefings that had been taking place, but nobody was able ever to put their finger on it and identify any particular individual. But, you know, there were concerns, I know that. A number of colleagues have spoken to me about it. But other than that, nobody, I don't think, knew except those who were specifically involved. And they, of course, have been asked to keep quiet because they may act as for the prosecution.
Where do we take this? Because there are some people who are saying, you know, we should really cut off relations with China. China is no longer just a competitor. China is, you know, a potential foe. How far do you think we should take this? Should, for instance, the Chinese be disinvited from the Prime Minister's AI summit later this month?
Oh, well, I think that China poses us a threat. I think that's very clear. America is clear about that. America has been withdrawing technology from China because of the espionage problems. They've also been advising a number of American companies to withdraw, and you've seen Apple now moving some of their production over to India. So they clearly believe that China poses a threat both in commercial terms and, of course, in military terms. So the reality for us is that the UK at the moment doesn't say in any of its documents that China is a threat. They talk about epoch-defining challenges and other such.
You want that language to be
semantics.
tightened up?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, if you're dealing with China, is China a threat? I asked today, is China a threat or is it not a threat? We've got a halfway house here that doesn't seem to want to say it's a threat, but seems to want to at times take action, but it's pretty discordant. And I have to say the Security Committee, Select Committee here, was very damning about the government's preparedness, as have been a number of very senior ex-security operatives who've been warning in the newspapers for the last 3 or 4 weeks that we have to do more.
But once again, should they be disinvited from the AI summit?
I don't believe they should be at the AI summit. I think the most important thing is to recognize there is a whole new threat arising from China's dominance of genomics at the moment with the world's biggest company, and their attempts, as we know now, to bring genomics and AI together to create an enormously new and disruptive platform that could be aimed directly at nations without them even realizing it. And I think that's important to understand what the threat is, and China is the key to that threat.
But they're also the second largest economy in the world. We want to do more trade with China. We need as many trade partners as we can get after Brexit. It's not that easy, is it?
Well, nothing's ever that easy, but just, you know, the idea that somehow you have to kowtow to China, otherwise you don't get business there, is an absurdity. Many countries are very tough on China, and America, as I keep coming back to, is very clear, and they are very clear about the threat they pose. There are business relationships going on. I personally am very concerned that we are far too already dependent on China in so many ways, and it's time for us to move that dependency away from China and start looking at other areas to invest in. So there are reasons why we need to be strong, but the truth is, if we don't call China out as a threat, then China just looks at us as a weak nation and doesn't even bother with us. And the important thing is you can know your enemy, but at the same time you can engage them. But it's no good for us to go in on bended knee, because that doesn't work at all. And that's why I believe that China needs to be called out as a threat to the way we live our lives and what we do. And I think America does it. I think we should follow suit.
Ian Duncan Smith, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Well, I'm joined now from Beijing by Victor Gao, the Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, who previously worked closely with former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. Mr. Gao, thanks very much for joining us. Accusations of spying at the heart of British democracy. How is China responding?
Thank you very much for having me. I understand the Chinese Foreign Ministry denounced this allegation and calling it completely false. Now, from my personal perspective, allow me to emphasize 2 points. First of all, major countries, including Britain and China, regularly spy about each other or against each other. That's normal. Secondly, I'm completely surprised about this allegation about Chinese spying into the British Parliament. Why? By the nature of its job, all the British parliamentary proceedings are supposed to be open and transparent and made available to the public. So there is no need to spy against the parliament because you just need to turn on your radio, turn on your television and keep yourself glued to the proceedings. Is that right? So I think my personal view is that there is a due process in Britain, run the due process, and hopefully eventually turn out to be witch hunt.
Well, I mean, as you said many times before, you know, all major countries, you said it again just now, all major countries spy on each other. We're not naming the individual involved in this case for legal reasons at this stage. I mean, one recent assessment shows Chinese investors have assets of more than 135 billion in the UK. China surely has plenty of interest in understanding what is said sometimes behind closed doors about China, about what UK politicians what policies they might be making, which would impact Chinese interests. And to suggest otherwise is sort of disingenuous.
No, allow me to make several very brief points. From the Chinese perspective, according to the best of my knowledge, China attaches great importance to its relations with Britain, and the Chinese people are generally speaking very friendly towards the British people. We want to get along with the British people. We want to do business with the British people. On the other hand, there is no interest at all in China, to the best of my knowledge, to interfere in the domestic political events in Britain, because we are living in parallel universes as far as politics are concerned. China will be having no incentive at all to get involved in domestic politics, and for the parliamentary proceedings, it's completely open.
I mean, as you may have heard in the earlier interview with the former Conservative Party leader Ian Duncan Smith, that is a view challenged directly by politicians like him who want the government to designate China as a threat to the UK. And there are many people who support him in that, not least our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. If that happened, how would China respond to that?
First of all, if you define China as a threat to Britain, you need to really explain to yourself and to the world what China does to threaten Britain. Does China threaten the monarchy system? No. Does China threaten the parliamentary system in Britain? No. Does China threaten the constitution of the United Kingdom? No. Does China threaten the British army or military? No. What's the threat? Tell me. If you feel
kind of... But the question is, how does China respond to that? You'll be very aware, Mr. Gao, that there are many parliamentarians who want China designated as a threat to the UK, many who fear that there is widespread spying. How would China respond to that?
First of all, allow me to make 2 points. If Britain eventually makes that decision, it reflects very poorly on the judgment of the British politician and the political system. I would simply find it unbelievable that Britain, given its very long, sophisticated political system, would come to that very crazy and insane conclusion. Secondly, there is no free lunch in geopolitics. If you make one move in one direction, it may trigger reciprocity by the other side. So you need to really understand the reciprocity for whatever major political move you play around. There is no free bowling game in geopolitics. If you play hardball will be played against you. Therefore, I think Britain needs to fully understand what's the threat. What's the threat?
Thank you so much for talking to us. Sorry to cut across you there. Thank you. Matt.
Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is with me here. Allow me to ask you a question, Lindsay. Do we need China more than they need us?
Absolutely. It's a question of little and large, isn't it? China is Britain's third or fourth largest trading partner. The other way around, we are their 16th or 17th, depending on how you calculated. But having said that, I do think the United Kingdom is important to China. There are a lot of Chinese students here. And we do see the Chinese putting a lot of effort into trying to influence British views of China, whatever the right...
Is that what you think this might be about?
It could be. Of course, we don't exactly know, but we do know that what they want to do, what the Chinese want to do, is make people more sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party and to act in their interests. And we see a lot of this through what is taught at the Confucius Institutes, which are in the different universities and where you can learn Mandarin and you can learn a lot about Chinese culture, and you could also learn what is good and great about the Chinese system. But the other thing is that we're seeing a very assertive diplomatic policy under Xi Jinping, which they call
wolf warrior
diplomacy after the film. And that, I think, shows how assertive, even aggressive they're being in trying to influence countries like Britain in their interests.
But the big difference, of course, compared to, let's say, the Soviet Union, of the old days of the Cold War, is that China is the world's second largest economy.
Absolutely. And if China was designated a foe, an enemy, rather than a competitor, and that's what Liz Truss wanted to do when she was Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister, well, in a sense, that would be diplomacy via cancel culture. It would be that you cannot have these kind of contacts, you cannot have any kind of understanding. And certainly in terms of things like climate change, where China is the leading country when it comes to some of it in innovation and solar power, to some extent wind power as well. Britain, if it's going to meet its net zero targets, it needs China. And also, I don't think that the Prime Minister is going to go for that, whatever Duncan Smith and others say, because he's a man who's looking at a cost of living crisis. And China is hugely important when it comes to manufacturers and when it comes to imports.
Lindsay, thanks very much indeed.